Coucou everybody, Coach Rab here and welcome to another chess noob video. Just to be clear, I am not a chess coach, not even close. I'm a health and wellness coach who loves chess, and this channel is here to showcase my journey to getting better at the fabulous game and learn through, well, my mistakes mostly I would imagine, and follow my journey. Again, it's one of those things that if you want to get better at chess, you're not sure where to start, you can follow my example if it helps. Today's lesson is all about a brilliant move. Now, as somebody who is not that great at chess, but improving, when you get a brilliant move by the engine standards, you get quite excited. You're like, whoa, okay. So this particular move does exploit F-pawns. Now, the reason F-pawns are quite weak is because they're typically only defended by the king after the opening, okay? So from get-go, there is only one defender of them. So if you can exploit that, it forces the king usually to move and take said pawns. Now, I'm going to showcase you a video, and the video in question is from a game that I played against my brother, okay? And I played the Vienna opening for white. Now, I will do a video all on the openings that I know. There's lots and lots of openings. I'm not going to get into it. And I'm not knowledgeable enough in the first instance to go through them all. But my advice would be pick an opening for black that you like, pick an opening for white. Openings are quite important because they allow you to set your pieces up for success. So, you know, if you're wanting to get your pieces in the right place, you're going to play better if you've got a nice foundation. I would attribute most of my early success to mastering, not mastering, because I'm not master by any means, but getting better at the openings. And in one of the openings for white, I do the Vienna. Now, one of the issues I have come across, my brother played, I was like, oh, you... Basically, when I play my pieces out, the Vienna starts off with the king's pawn, which is e4, okay? So pump that out in front. And depending on what my opponent plays, usually they also match because an e-pawn opening is quite normal. Then I would follow up with the knight that was sitting on b, coming out to protect the pawn that I've just launched. It makes sense, fairly standard as part of the Vienna. Now, typically the Vienna, I'm trying to build a pawn wall coming up, coming to that position, obviously. Black, I need to play their move or it won't let me. Typically trying to build some sort of a pawn wall, whether it's there or just into this position here. Develop castle and then attack up these diagonals, okay, and get into the other side, depending on where their king goes, of course. That was quite waffly because, you know, I'm not that great at these sorts of things. But regardless, what I'm trying to show you today was how I managed to solve a problem that's been plaguing me for a bit of time. And that is all centered around these pawns here, okay? So what happened is, my brother brought his knight out too. Again, his knight is then supporting the very pawn that he has put out. So it's one of those things in chess is that you don't want to leave pieces without their defender, because otherwise they become just a free piece that I could just take or he could just take it. And it's like, whoa, great, happy days. So the next developing move, you've got to understand with openings, again, I'll do a video on these, is that openings have hundreds of variations and you have to learn a lot of them or understand what you're trying to achieve, so that, because you can't control what your opponent's going to do and you need to know what changes with your opening depending on what they play. But typically if they played the knight out, my next move is to bring the bishop out, okay? It brings it out, it controls this diagonal and it puts eyes on that vulnerable pawn that I was talking about, okay? It also sets the tone for what I'm going to hopefully do further on in the game and attack across the diagonals. Now, what he did is an issue that's happened to me a few times, is he moved his knight. Okay, so right away, he's moved his knight across and he's attacking my bishop. Now, they normally say not to play the same move twice in a row because you lose, or you can lose tempo. It's not usually advisable. I had just brought my bishop out. He's now forcing me to move it again. If I don't move, he's going to bingo that bishop. He'll just jump in, take that bishop. Let's just say I left it and did, well, I could do a developing move. He could take it and I could take, fair enough, right? But ultimately, if I don't do something to protect that bishop, he's going to take it. He also wouldn't have moved his knight if he wasn't planning to get rid of it anyway, okay? And I'm looking at where could I go with that bishop. There's not really many places I could go, because if I moved it up to here, he's probably just going to lock me in. And then after that, I've got nowhere to go. If I go there, I get bingoed. I'll get bingoed where I am. If I come back, I get bingoed. And if I retreat all the way down, he's safe. But guess what? I've lost that valuable thing I was talking about, tempo. Because I've been moving a bunch of pieces and I've not really achieved anything. So it's always been a bit of a bee in my bonnet. I'm always like, how am I going to cope with this? So one of the options that I remembered, I saw a video by Chess Vibes, Guy Nelson, very good. He's a fantastic player and he's got some great video lessons, so go and check him out. And I remember him doing a video on exploiting F-pawns. But, you know, mid-game, I didn't have a chance to revise that. That would be technically cheating. So I'm sitting thinking to myself, there's something you can do with the F-pawn, but I couldn't remember what it was. And in my head, initially, I was thinking to myself, well, what if I just ignore this F-pawn concept, because I couldn't remember what it was, and if I just pull my bishop back. Now, if I'd pulled it back, right, he would have bingoed me, but I would have taken, and then I would have opened up this channel for my rook, okay? Because my channel would then be open, and I would technically own that channel, which is, it's not necessarily a bad thing, and in the process, I would have lost a bishop, but he would have lost a knight, so you're like, right, fine, right? So that was what I was nearly going to go for, because I was thinking, right, that's not the end of the world if that happens. But like I say, in the back of my mind, there was this F-pawn weakness, and I was like, what is that? So I thought, you know what? I'll just go for it. I'll try. Because I thought to myself, if I do throw this bishop to the wolves, okay, there's no one defending that pawn. So when I take it, the only one that can take it is the king. And he's in check, so he kind of has to deal with it. Whether he takes it or moves is irrelevant because he still loses castling rights. Now, when it comes to castling, which puts your king hidden behind the pawns, you can only castle if you haven't moved your king or your rook and the pieces are, there's a gap in order for them to move and they swap. And it allows your king to move 2 spaces and it swaps the rook around and effectively brings your rook into play. By me forcing him to take me, loses his castling rights. And in the back of my mind, at this point in time, I hadn't quite grasped why it was important, but I thought, you know what, I'm going for it, right? So I played the move, I did bishop to take pawn, and all of a sudden I got this brilliant move. No, it's on game review effectively, but at the time I didn't know that. But on game review it says it was a brilliant move, and I was like, oh wow. So basically I put his king in check, right? So now his king has no choice but either to move or take me. He could move out the way he could, but that's not the best thing. And he can then take me. So then he did, he took me over. So it was there, and he took me. Then it wasn't until, and this is where my vision is going to have to improve over time, and I think it will. Once he took it, then I could see what I could do. I wish I'd seen this beforehand, right? As I said, I was just rolling off the fact that I was like, there's something about the F-pawn, and I was either going to lose it on his terms, you know, and take the channel. I was like, well, that's a kind of win. But I was thinking, oh, there's something. And in my head, I was thinking, if he loses castling rights, that's a bit of a mess for his defense. So I was like, the hell with it, I'll sacrifice the bishop for castling rights. I was ultimately willing to sacrifice the bishop anyway, right? But once the king moved, then I saw the vulnerability, and I'll never forget this one now. So once he'd moved, I was able to bring my queen out. Now, game review says that's also a great move. Now, look at that. I brought the queen out, and now he's in check, okay? Now, the queen, they usually say don't bring the queen out too early, right? Because she's a very valuable piece. Apart from the king, which is game over, she's the most valuable piece. She's worth 9 points, right? So typically she becomes a target. But in the right hand, she can become an absolute wrecking ball. And in this position, that's exactly what happens. So his king's in check. He has to deal with the threat. So he did what was natural. He brought out the pawn, which blocks and attacks the queen, okay? And this is where the wrecking ball element of the queen comes in, because she can move in a lot of different directions. She can move, you know, up the way, she can diagonal there, she can go in every direction. She's versatile and as many squares as she likes as well. So she's a very flexible piece, the most flexible piece, actually. The king is also can move in every direction, but can only move 1 square because he's the king and he's very large and can't move very fast. So anyway, he brings out his pawn, and this is when the wrecking ball element of the queen comes in, because then you nab the pawn. Now, when you're thinking about scores wise, he took my bishop, which is worth 3, right? And I've only then for that move, I've so far scalped 2 pawns for it. The first pawn nipped round. I've then scalped the second pawn. So I need to start stealing material Otherwise, that sacrifice, other than taking castle and right, sacrifice would have been not for nothing, but not as valuable. So I took that in place, and then he's in a bit of a state here because I've got nabbed that pawn back, and then depending on what he does, see what's under threat now. This rook in the corner is now under threat, and look, it has no defenders, right? He can't do anything about me taking that rook, but his knight is also under attack. Yes, his pawn's under attack here, but it's defended, so that's not really an issue here. So he's got a bit of a pickle here because he's thinking, right, does he want to lose a rook? Does he want to lose a knight? That kind of thing. So it's quite a tricky move. And it's very, very difficult to deal with. Now, at that time, he thought, right, I'll defend it with the knight. Now, that's quite smart for protecting his rook, because I can't, if I take his knight, his king will bingo me back, or his queen can bingo me as well. So he's effectively protected his rook, but his knight's wide open, okay? And as that, I gobbled that up. So right off the bat now, I've had 2 pawns and his knight for my bishop. Remember, knights are worth 3. 2 pawns makes 5. I've sacrificed 3. So that was a definite good sacrifice, if you like. And from that point on, the queen it becomes a target. So he's obviously bringing he brought his pawns out there to try and chase away the queen. I pull back. He's pulling out. I'm not sure. I think he's trying to block my attack there. And I then put a bit of threat on his knight. Now, I was in 2 minds at this point. I was thinking, right, do I want to pull the queen to complete safety? But then I thought what I wanted to do was put a tempo on his knight. Now, what that tempo means is like, because I'm putting his knight under attack, this pawn will bingo that knight. Will bingo that knight if he's not careful. I'll just keep the 1 arrow up, keep it nice simple. So it usually forces that knight to either move back or move into a different square to get to safety, right? Now, if he moves to here, my knight could also get him again, and so on. And so it creates what's known as a tempo. It's not quite a forcing move, but I mean, you would want to protect your knight because a pawn taking it wouldn't be great. But as it turns, he thought to himself, I'm going to put more pressure on the queen. So the next move that I did was something that I thought about, and I wasn't sure. I had a bit of time to think about it, but I thought, initially I was thinking, do I just want to pull the queen back to complete safety? And then I wasn't sure whether to maybe bring her through to the middle. But what I then settled on was this move, because if I bring the queen in front, it does what's known as a pin, okay? Now remember, this pawn is attacking that knight. So he would normally be thinking, oh, I better move the knight now because it's going to get taken. But he can't move his knight because my queen has got eyes on the king. You can't move a piece if it then allows your king to be in check. So in other words, that knight has to stay there, otherwise there's problems. So the options he has is he's either going to lose his knight, or if he moves his king, it unpins the knight, because all of a sudden now the king's not behind it, allows him to move. So it did put him a bit of a pickle. So I played that move and it worked out quite well because he then moved his king. And then the next move, again, I mulled over. I was in 2 minds. Part of me wanted to push the pawn forwards because I thought to myself, I have a huge habit, to my fault, and probably one of the things I'm going to improve on to get better at this game, of that once I smell blood, I'm like, go, 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 right? And sometimes I need to remember, whoa, I need to develop, because right now I've got a queen and I've got a knight out on the board. But that's it, my pawn structure is fairly balanced. He's actually got a pawn structure here and a pawn structure here. You know, he actually has developed some. He's got a knight out, and I know his king's lost castling rights, but in terms of development, I'm not that much further ahead on development. So I was tempted to make this pawn move because that would reinforce the center, and then I could start then moving things around and think about castling. But then as it turned out, when I was looking at that play in general, I thought, you know what? I'm going to push this. And the reason for it, I took his knight because it was protected by my pawn and it would encourage either a retake or a king move. If he retook with his queen, and this is what I was trying to mull over because I know my brother, and it would have been very likely if he took with his queen, if I didn't take him afterwards, because if I take him afterwards, I'm going to lose my queen too, right? So, because his king would just take it. There's nothing to back up my queen. And I know my brother is very, very likely he would. But then I thought, you know what? What I'll do is I'll look at some development moves I could do afterwards. I was like, right, I wasn't guaranteed he was going to take with the queen, but as it turns out, he did. So he took that pawn back. So now our queens are having a face-off. The girls are going to have a fight, and it's my move. If I take his queen, he's just going to take back. that's just that's like, goodbye girls, so long. Me and the boys are going to play the field now, the girls are out the way. Credit to Preston for that joke. So that's not going to be great. So then I thought, well, what I need to do is I need to back up my queen. I didn't want to compromise my pawn structure. This would back up the queen, but then it leaves a gap in the back end for when a castle. Castling, as I said, needs a clear back line, and your king and rook on the side that you're castling, because you can castle king side and queen side. It needs to have a clear run, and they can't have moved. So my next development move anyway would be to bring my G knight out, okay? And a good place to put this, normally you don't try and put knights on the edge of the board, because knights can fight in L's, okay? Lots of like dog legs, if you like. And if they are in a central space, look how many squares they can. I can't draw arrows now. Well, anyway, it's going that way. They can cover. See that? They can cover quite a lot of squares. If that knight is in the middle of the board, if this knight is in the middle, those squares follow it. And it's a large area it can cover. On the side of the board, they lose a lot because a lot of that goes off the board. So normally you don't want to be putting your knight on the side. But in this case, I thought, well, I need to back up my queen. And if he did take my queen, like my brother being my brother, there's a very high chance he might have been like, go for it, just take him. You know, he would want to blunt my weapons as much as he can. At least then, in this case, which I did, I put the knight out. In this case, I'm protecting my queen. Now, as it turned out, oh no, that's it. Right, so I played the queen. Sorry. I thought I played, this is the one I was originally considering putting on the side, but I didn't. I actually did the right move and played it to the centre. So actually, shut up, ignore that last bit. The knight is then in protected, but it also was important because it was covering my king, so there was no freshness, because what he might have done is moved his king, put me in check and caused some problems. But anyway, I guarded my queen, and then interesting enough, he didn't attack my queen with the queen. He did something that was not like my brother. So I was like, who is this guy? This guy's been doing his homework. He pushed his pawn. So then from that point, I was like, right, I'm going to have to be the hot-headed one here, right? Because if I move my queen, what's then going to happen is there's a vulnerable pawn down here, you know? If I was to move my queen somewhere safe-ish there, you know, I suppose that would have defended the pawn. But ultimately, I didn't want him getting in the background. So I thought to myself, you know what? I'm just going to take his queen out of the game. He took back. But the difference is, I now had my knights out, and it allowed me to then push forward and then castle. So I took his queen, he took back, I popped him into check with my knight because I just want to get a bit of tempo on him. It's always good when you get your opponent running, so, or I think it's quite good to that, because then you control the game then. When you're baking checks or forcing moves, you're in control. Sometimes when you play a passive move, like castling can sometimes, unless you castle and put them in check because of it, which often happens when you castle queenside, it's quite nice to be in control rather than being controlled. So I put him in check. He moved his king closer. I gobbled up the pawn. So by this stage, because I'd taken quite a bit of his material, the queens were off the board. I was thinking to myself, right, just gobble up his guard. So I ate up his pawn there. He then brought his rook across, attacking said knight, all right? And I brought a pawn up to attack his king. Now, the reason that pawn was important, once again, as I said before, I put him in check, which controls, it forces him to deal with the threat. He can't just take the pawn because my knight's protecting it, okay? So he can't just gobble that up because this knight here is protecting it. So it forced him, so although he's threatening this knight right now, it's forcing him to deal with it. So he is reacting while I'm creating, which is quite a powerful position to be in. So he then forces his king to move. Now, I'm not worried about this pawn because it's protected. So it now gives me free reign to go gobble up another one. So I'm sort of playing a bit of Pac-Man here, just eating up pieces as I go. I feel like everything's protected in the back line. It's not as developed as I'd like it to be, but nonetheless, he's down to 4 pawns, all his pieces exposed, and most importantly, his king's in the middle of the board. Now, the only time you really want your king in the middle of the board is when you're in what's known as the end game, when there's very few pieces left and the king acts as a weapon that can go and gobble things up himself because he does have free reign. Early on in the game, or especially when there's long-range pieces like bishops and rooks in the game, you don't want your king in the middle because they can be attacked from afar. You want them protected. So his king in the middle of the board was quite a vulnerability for that. He decides to push his pawn forwards, threatening the pawn that I've got there. I then controlled again. Now this became one of my favourite style moves, is a fork that includes a check. Now a fork is when you attack two pieces, in this case technically three, but two certainly valuable pieces in one. Now knights can do it, rooks can do it, bishops can do it too, queens also. So in this case, because it's a check, right, normally if I put my knight there and if the king was somewhere else, he would just move his rook to safety and he'd be fine, right? But in this case, he's in check. He has to deal with the check. Those types of forks are like epic. They're beautiful when you land them. You're like, get in. And in that case, he had to react to it. So he moved closer to my knight and I then bingoed his rook. Now by this point, often when you take the rook with a knight, your knight can end up either on this square or sometimes in the corner. And often enough, it's quite hard to get out. So in my mind, whenever I've done that, whenever I've taken a rook with the knight, I usually just think of that as a sacrifice. A rook's worth 5, a knight's worth 3. I just think, right, that knight did its job. He galloped into battle, stabbed one of the key players in the game. He's in the corner stuck. He might fight his way out. He might not. I'm not that fussed. That generally happens. Top players, I'm sure, will rescue their knight. They're expendable to me. So that knight did its job. It was in the corner. He's not in any danger at the moment, but I don't want to waste any moves getting him out. He gobbled up my pawn in the centre. I then gobbled that back up. Not only did that, guess what? Put him in check again. So again, I'm trying to control the narrative. Sounds very controlling and narcissistic. But here, I'm trying to control the narrative to control the flow of the game. That forces him to be constantly on reactive. It's not fun for him when that happens, when you're constantly dealing with check threats. It's not fun, but it's the nature of the game. So it forces him again. He brings it forward. He wants to attack. I then brought the bishop. Now again, that's still a developing move. That's the bishop finally getting off its starting square, and it's defending that knight as well, which is quite important. He then went, sod you, bro. I'm going to attack you. He brings his bishop all the way down. Good developing move. Puts my king in check. Now, if I didn't have a move to deal with this, then I might have had to move my king out of trouble, and that would have lost my castling rights too. As it is, I was able to do a fairly sensible push the pawn forward. Now, the reason that that's quite good is it not only protects the attack, right, it also attacks the bishop back. So he can't just leave his bishop there, otherwise I'll bingo him. So it forces him, it's kind of a forcing move as such. And if he does take it, I can then take back. So it's a attacking piece that has a backup. It's like going down the town park for a fight, but you've got your mates with you, kind of thing. That's that kind of setup. So it forced him to then think about what was going on. He pushed back. Now that was quite smart, because from that position there, he keeps eyes on that. That pawn is now pinned. I can't move that now. Not that I'd want to, but I can't anyway, because if I move it, it puts my king in check from here. So it is effectively pinned, which is like, right, okay, fair enough. But as it is, he does have a piece hanging. Now, remember, a hanging piece is any piece that doesn't have a defender. In that case, his pawn. So this pawn here, there's nothing defending it. And as my goal of playing Pac-Man today, I was just gobbling that up in true fashion, right? The game engine wanted me to do this. I don't see that at the time. You don't get that until afterwards, otherwise it would just be cheating, right? So you get the game review afterwards, and the game engine plays at a computer level, which is an ELO of 3,000, some ridiculous. I don't think any human can play like that, and I'm certainly nowhere close. So I don't see these sort of moves. And they also play moves that are, they see things you don't. Now, in this instance, the move it recommended wasn't actually that bad a move, because the move was a beautiful fork, right? Putting the king in check and attacking this bishop. Now, I'd said earlier that this knight, to me, he was dead to me. He was done. But if he'd taken another bishop with him, I would have been so proud of him if I'd seen that. That was not a move. I was too busy focusing on here. And that's typical of my play. I sometimes focus around what I can see in the middle, and I forget about what's going on in the peripheral. Because if I'd put him in check, say he'd moved, I could have bingoed that before he ultimately took me back, right? I didn't see it. Again, that's the power of hindsight. That was a decent move from there. That would have been a lovely fork, and I would have been probably closer to checkmate faster. So it is. I took the pawn. He then brings his bishop across, attacking said knight, which also left my knight completely hanging out there. But by this point, as I said, I was just like, he's done anyway, he's done. So I wasn't really in a hurry to protect him. What I wanted to do was control the narrative again. So I castled queenside. Now, when you castle queenside, it's a longer stretch. They sometimes call it long castle because the king travels from a further distance. So I hadn't moved my king, I hadn't moved the left rook, flipped it round. Now, the benefit, and the reason I wanted to do this rather than move the knight right off the bat, it puts him in check. So it was one of those moves that I not only castled, which is defensive and arguably a passively defensive move, it then became an attacking move too. So right now he's attacking that and he's also attacking that. So I could only have really rescued one of them at the time. Now I've put him in a check instead through the rook. He has to deal with that problem initially before I can then, get things moving again. So again, to control the narrative, my knight went galloping to put him in check, which he's probably getting really, really annoyed by now. So he's having to move again. And then I was then targeting this bishop, because by this point I was thinking, you know what, I'll get this knight out of the fire line and into battle. I kind of thought he was going to, cause me some problems elsewhere. But by moving this knight, what I also did was put him back in check, right? So remember, this has got eyes on the king. When I move the knight out the way, targeting his bishop, because that's what I want to go for next, I've also opened back up this check. I'm staying in control, and that's the thing. If you control the narrative, he's reacting to what you're doing. It's very hard to get your game off. So he moves his king, I get the bishop. But by this point, I'm then handing back control to him because I don't have any more forcing moves at this time. And he did, what any of these players do, was he then took that knight. And it was lying there open. I just left it to the wolves. Had I spotted that fork I was talking about earlier, that life might have been different, but that's power of hindsight. So he scalped it. I thought, yeah, fair play. I'm up 12 points by this point. I've got a good defensive layer. My king's fairly safe. But what has now become vulnerable is this pawn. Okay, so if he wanted to, and I was trying to get in the mindset of him. He's probably thinking, right, I'm fighting a losing battle here. I'll take as many of them with me as I can. And if he had got this down to take that pawn on the next move, that's the whole fox in the hen house. You don't want that, because he gets down, he can start bingoing things, and it's very, very difficult for me to do anything about it. So I thought to myself, what I'll do is I'll push that pawn forward. It creates double defenders there. There are probably better ways of doing that. That's something I'm going to have to learn. I've seen some people make better moves. I'm trying to think what they do. I need to go back and revise it. But ultimately, there's better moves than do that. But ultimately, I was trying to think very, very quickly on the spot, how can I protect that pawn as I push it forward, so it's then got two defenders. He decides to push this pawn forward. I just took it with the rook. By this point, it's just a countdown. There was a couple of times I could have got earlier checkmate. He puts rook on rook there. I then put his king in check. So he was rook on rook trade. He wanted me to take, because then he can take back with his king. But I wasn't having none of it, so I put his king in check with bishop, forcing him to move. Put him in check again, forcing him to move. Again, controlling the narrative where I can. Then my little other rook that was sitting doing nothing, pulled it across. Now, normally when you have something like this, where you've got the king in front of a piece, the piece behind it's quite vulnerable, because if you put the king in check, as I did here, it forces the king to move. He can't move this way because of the eyes on here, so he has to move this way somewhere. It is only just one square. Now, I might have wanted to take, but then he would just take back. So I was like, well, I don't want to mess around with that. So I put him in check again. Now, what this is starting to do is the beginnings of something known as a ladder mate, where he can't go this way and he's checked here, so he has to go into this lane somewhere. And then generally what you do, if there was nothing else in the way, you would crisscross your rooks across the board, constantly put him in check till he gets to the corner, he's nowhere else to go. As it stood, I had all these pieces in the way. He forced down. Now, what happened here? He moved in, which Game Review doesn't like, because this rook is actually defended. But what he's done is he's then left that rook wide open. When you're playing these games, it's the power of hindsight. At the time, you're under pressure, you've been constantly reacting, you haven't moved your king, and you don't see things. And it happens. I do it hundreds of times, especially when I play Blitz, the 3-minute games. I'm a atrocious at blitz because I just don't see things just yet. That's something I'm going to have to work on. And in this case, that happened. He's thinking, get my king to safety. I then got his rook, and after that, the end was nigh. I just started to pick him apart, gobble up the pieces. I probably could have got checkmate sooner, but there nonetheless got him there. So this was a form of kind of ladder mate I was working on here. So just beforehand, when he moved up, I took his bishop just because I didn't want him messing around. He moved his king. I gobbled up the pawn. Now in this position, this rook on the 7th rank is stopping him. He cannot step on that line at all. And this one stops him going anywhere this way. Stop him going anything beyond the E rank. So if you look, he's crisscrossed off. The king, he's got no more pieces left, so he actually has to make a move. Now this is where you have to watch you don't ever give away a draw, because if the king can't make a legal move, let's just say there was something, there was a bishop on this diagonal here, right? And the king is not in check, but he can't move without putting himself in check, it becomes a stalemate draw. So you always have to be careful that you don't, what's that thing, the escape from the jaws of victory or whatever it is, defeat in the jaws, yeah, you clutch defeat from the jaws of victory. You're winning, and then you throw it away at the last minute. But as it stands, he's blocked off here, he's blocked off there. He does have a legal move, and he has to move. And his legal move is here, onto that square there, which he has to make. And then I've been going with the checkmate, because he cannot go here. He cannot go across this diagonal. He cannot go across this way, and he's in check. Game over. So that all stems back to that one move early on, the quote-unquote brilliant move. Now remember, you don't see it's a brilliant move until you watch the game review afterwards. And when I got it, I was like, ooh, that was quite nice. And that all stemmed from this annoyance that I had. Because I play the Vienna and I'm very familiar with it, with that particular variation, I have to bring the bishop out to there. Now, sometimes I'll bring the bishop out and pin his knight, depending on what he's played first, if he's played another move first. But in this case, what I've started doing is putting the bishop onto this line here to control that diagonal. Also because I told you I think I'm going for something that's known as Legal's mate, and that is setting up a Legal's mate eventually, if I get somebody with that, I'll be celebrating big time. So setting that up, and it's been a couple of times now in my games that people have done this move to me. And what I've been doing up until that point was just pulling this back, losing my bishop, taking it back, but then having the channel. That was what I was previously doing. And I made my peace with that. I was like, right, fine, I now control the channel, fine. But having watched that video, I think it was on Chess Vibes, I'm pretty sure it was that, and about exploiting F-pawns, I couldn't remember exactly what happened, and I couldn't see it until I played it, and taking that. And once he took back, all of a sudden, I noticed there's that queen thing that I'd seen. Oh, that's from the king, sorry. There's that queen thing right up here. Puts him in check, and there's a bunch of things he can do from here. I mean, he can move, but if he moves straight off the bat, I bingo his pawn. You know, depending on where he goes now, it's a really problem for him. He's got to move somewhere, probably back or whatever, and I bingo the bishop, the knight anyway. So the bottom line is, it's one of those very handy tips that I've learned for exploiting it. The same would be true if he was exploiting my f pawn down here, because it's only defended by the king. So that's a long-winded way of saying I've added another tool to my arsenal. There are millions of tools you have to add to your game here to get up into the higher levels of play, but that's one that I'm a bit more confident with now. So should my opponent ever play that move again, putting my bishop in danger, I'll be like, aha, time to sacrifice the bishop, open things up, ruin his castle rights, and then bring my wrecking ball of a queen. Hope you enjoyed watching this. Maybe you learned something. Maybe you can develop as you go. Top players will be looking at this going, well, of course you do that, Rab. And in fact, I've got something better. Fair play to you. Good for you with your higher rating. I will get there one day, maybe. But at the moment, I'm enjoying the process of learning. That's the key thing. It's a fantastic game, whether you're playing black or white. It's frustrating as well, because getting beat by somebody that plays a great move on you is totally fine, actually, because you're like, whoa, respect. But getting beat by somebody because you boo-booed or made a blunder, as per one of my previous videos, that's when you're like, oh, and it stings. But weirdly enough, when it stings, you don't typically, I never feel like I want to quit. I want to go back and do better. Now, in this position, like I say, my brother was not expecting that at all. It's not a move that I had known. If I hadn't seen that video previously and was aware that there was something about the F-pawns, I don't think I would have seen that, not for a long time. So it's not that he did anything wrong here. It's just that I got that great move in, and that did change everything about the game. With that queen, she's a wrecking ball. You know, as I say, if she gets onto that e-file here, she's got eyes on the rook, she's got eyes, yes, that pawn, but it's unlikely, and eyes on the knight. He can't save them all, and you're going to start losing pieces as well as having lost castle knight, so it's a pretty awesome move. Thank you very much, everybody. As always, like, comment, subscribe if this is your thing, and watch the journey continue. As of today, I'm rated 1305 on my daily rating. The goal for this year is to get daily up to 1500. Now remember, as I said before, there's a huge skill gap between your daily rating and rapid. Rapid is more akin to tournament play and you've got less time. Daily rating, you know, I've got all the time in the world if I want to. I try and play quite quick with it because I like the game to flow. But ultimately, I could sit there for 10 minutes and look at the move if I really had to. So that showcases the difference. I don't pretend to be anything that I'm not, but I am improving, and that's the key thing. So anybody, if this is you and you think about getting into it, just take baby steps with it. You will eventually get matched up with people on your same level if you use the chess.com match finder algorithm, and then you'll all be in the same boat, in which case you'll win some games, you'll lose some games, and then it'll feel a bit more fair rather than just losing all the time. So, but thank you very much, and as always, have a great day.